My name is Advaita Grover, and I shall be your moderator for today. It gives me immense pleasure to have you all and welcome you all to the very first webinar organized by the RG Annual Book Series on corporate laws and corporate affairs. We thank you all for joining us today on what is a momentous occasion for our organization. The RBS, which was started in 2016, is an academic, student-run, and peer-reviewed annual journal which deals with the subjects of corporate laws and corporate affairs. Our previous editions have dealt with subjects such as international taxation, corporate regulations, and corporate governance. Today, we are fortunate to have with us Mr. Abhishek Dubey, who readily agreed to be the key speaker for today's talk. And he agreed to do so at such a short notice. Sir, I welcome you and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Advaita.
Mr. Dubey is currently working with SAM and serves as the principal associate with the M&A and private equity team. With over a decade's worth of experience in the subject, it was only natural to invite Sir to talk on this topic of our discussion for today, which is private equity. So, sir, without any further ado, I invite you to begin your talk. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I hope you guys can see the slide deck, right? Advaita? Sure. Okay, so let's start with the presentation. So, basically, first of all, what do you guys understand from private equity or venture capital? So you must be reading daily, some of the other companies getting funded. There is private equity investments. There are venture capital deals that are happening. So can you please write in the chat box, all the participants, any recent deal, private equity or venture capital deals that you may have read about? Yes, Amrit, Clicks Capital is going, there was a news about Clicks Capital investing in Lakshmi Vilas Bank. Any other news that you would have read about? Yeah, right, Chaitanya. So, so basically, let's first understand what is private equity and how is it different from venture capital. And I would be dealing with both private equity and venture capital today because these two are really connected. So this is the startup financing life cycle. Now you would see a valley of death at the left bottom, and this is called valley of death. Say a lot of startups, when they commence their operations, they are either bootstrapped by the founders themselves, or it is funded by some form of seed capital or angel funding. And to get some serious money, which is basically the money from VCs or PE funds, they have to do their first or maybe in some cases longer operations, and then they pitch before the VC and PE funds. And during this period of 1 to 2 years, this is called the value of death, and this is called so because most of the startups, in fact, the statistics are staggering, 99% of the startups fail during this period. So this is the most important period during the life cycle of a startup. So first, let's understand what is angel funding or what is seed capital. Yeah, Ritom has said that Jio has raised several crores. He has written thousands of crores by selling stakes to several funds. So that's correct. Yeah, Jio platforms. So one of the most, in fact, the most talked about private equity investments are relating to Jio Platforms, which is a subsidiary of Reliance Industries Limited. where several funds have put in their money. So we will try to understand what do they mean, or what's the end game in this. Why is everyone lining up to invest in geo platforms? So yeah, coming back to the value of death. Now this is the time where angels, or the founders raise money from angels, which are basically high net worth individuals who may give about 100 crores, sorry, 1 to 2 crores, or maybe even lesser, to the founders, who may be their friends, and also you know uh, through their network. So this is where they raise some form of money or seed capital to commence their operation, to hire advisors, to hire tech platforms, to build uh, strategies for them, to build the technology and apps for them. So once you cross that stage and you have some sort of customer interaction or a robust business model, or you think that this product is a great market fit, you pitch that to VCs. Now, what are VCs? VCs are basically venture capital funds who would invest in non-public companies, which means that their investment is illiquid. uh, to explain in simple terms, or in the parlance which we generally know, let us take example of mutual funds. So whoever wants to invest, several people either buy mutual funds, and a select number of people who have knowledge of the stock market, they would go and buy shares directly. So what you do is, and what do mutual funds do? Mutual funds collect money from you. They have a fund manager and a team which supports them, which supports the fund manager. They select the stocks in which they should put your money in, and they get a fee for that, which is the expense ratio in the mutual fund. Similarly, VC institutions go to high net worth individuals and several other, for example, family offices of industrialists and other institutional investors. They raise money, and that is called a venture capital fund. And there again, in the venture capital fund, there are partners who basically identify private companies who are at early stage of their cycle, and they put their bets that these companies will cross the value of death and are high growth companies, and therefore the investment that I'm making today may multiply manyfold if I invest in this company. So now, what is the difference between private equity and VC funding, and why is it so risky for any investor? The reason is, first of all, the companies that you're looking at do not have a track record. So, for example, let us say if a mutual fund, in a general parlance, is investing your money, it has a track record of, for example, it selects HDFC Bank as a preferred stock to invest your money in. It has a track record of 20, 30 years of HDFC Bank giving consistently good returns. Something like Asian Paints. So basically there is a track record of the listed companies. They have been in existence for several years, and therefore, in comparison to a company which is just 1 year old, the money is much more safer. But then, why would anyone invest in a private in such a startup through private equity funds or a venture capital? Because of the returns. So for example, somebody has written that Flipkart was one of the unicorns in India, and then it ultimately got sold to uh, Walmart. So the returns that the private equity investors who supported Walmart, who supported Flipkart in the early stages of Flipkart until 2016-17, that is when Flipkart raised its last round of funding. they were able to make great returns, and that is true for startups who then basically uh, cross the valley of death, and they basically are able to raise series A, B, C, D, and so on funding. So so this is why private equity and venture capital funds, they invest in such illiquid stocks, such private companies who do not have a track record, because the probability of return is much higher. So higher the risk, higher the reward. That is the principle on which they work. So here you're seeing that early stage. This is first, second, third. So you must have heard that or read in Economic Times and several other news, business news that you would follow, that there is series A, B, C, D. What is that? That is nothing but growth stages or funding rounds of a startup. Now, how that works is, for example, this first round is a series A, then the company deploys that capital it raises for the growth, and then you have series B. When the company runs out of capital, it thinks that it should raise more money, and that is when we raise a series B round, and so on, series C. And ultimately the end game of this is either a strategic sale, like in the case of Walmart and Flipkart, or an IPO, where the stocks, after a period of maybe 7 to 10 to 15 years, becomes a liquid stock and the investors can get an exit. So if you guys have any questions, you can keep posting on the chat box, and Advaita is basically taking, he will be keeping a track of those, and we will address those questions during the session. So this is again another example. So here, if you would note that there is, the first is angel funding, which is at the ideation or the concept stage. Then there is a feasibility stage or a product development stage where you get some seed funding. Then there are early venture capitalist firms who bet on startups very early on, and they basically keep spraying money, small amounts of money in large number of startups, so that they hedge their risk. So for example, they will have a venture capital fund only for seed funding, and they will give somewhere close to 50 lakhs, 1 crore to 2 crores in across 30 to 40 startups in a particular region, for let's say India or Asia Pacific, South Asia. So that is how they formulate their investing strategies. And then moving on, when the market validates the business model, there is a need for scaling up. Then there is venture capital or PE money, serious institutional money that flows in. And once the company turns profitable, it has significant market share, it chooses to go for an IPO. Now moving on, so these are the three things that we just discussed, which is seed, angel funding, venture capital, and private equity. And the exit is when there is a strategic sale to a strategic investor, or the company who runs that business. So you would ask a question on what exactly is strategic investor. How is it different from a PE fund or a venture capital fund? What is a strategic investor? So a strategic investor, the best example to give you is someone like Walmart, who is in the same line of business as a Flipkart. So instead of the private equity and venture capital funds, which had invested in Flipkart, taking Flipkart to IPO, they got an offer from Walmart, which is a strategic investor, may or may not take Flipkart to IPO because it would fuel or provide more fuel to Flipkart to raise its market share in India, expand in the Indian diaspora. And anyway, the e-commerce market penetration is, very, very low in comparison with developed countries in India. So Walmart would have thought that India is a great market to be in, and therefore let me take the company and run the company on my own. So Walmart, Flipkart is an example of strategic investor or a strategic business like Walmart acquiring a startup like Flipkart, which is in the same space. So let us see, it's very important to understand what a founder will have to give away when it is taking money from the investors at each stage. So and this is what you may be reviewing documents as lawyers, as counsels, and you will have to see whenever you review documents that an investor is seeking what level of rights, what is the level of rights, or what are the level of vote, veto or affirmative vote matters that the company or the founder is giving away. So if you're representing a founder, you would generally not offer a board seat to the seed or angel investors. They will they may opt for a observer on the board. So the angel investors, so there is a network of angel investors, so they are also more or less institutionalized, and the network then provides an observer who will attend board meetings. He will oversee, they will mentor, but they will not have a veto or anything at the seed stage. And the rights of the investors are limited to the rights that are there under the Companies Act. Now, what are the rights which are given to a shareholder under the Companies Act? The major right that is there is that if there is a rights issue, then or further issue of shares by the company, then it should be given to all existing shareholders. So if I see I am an angel investor, I have invested 50 lakh rupees in a company, or 25 lakh rupees in a company, then if I see that there is more growth potential, and the company is going for a series pre-series A round, or getting some seed institutional money, I would also like to participate and maintain my stake in the company at whatever percent I am at. So let's say I am at 5% by investing 25 lakhs. I would invest another 15, 20 lakhs depending on the round and maintain my stake. If I do not maintain my stake, I will go down in my shareholding, which I would not like to do at this stage. This is because I see that the company has great potential. So when venture capitalists, which is serious institutional money, they have a board seat, and there is a list of matters which cannot be acted upon without the consent of the VC. Now, what are these matters called? These are generally called affirmative vote matters, veto rights, or reserved matters. So just keep this in mind. We will get back into understanding these concepts in more detail shortly. Then there are private equity investors, which can be very, very big firms like Silver Lakes, Carlyle, which have Silver Lakes has recently invested in Geo Platforms. Brookfield, Blackstone, TPG, Goldman Sachs. These are big private equity firms. And then there are smaller private equity funds as well, which raise money throughout Europe, US, China, India, and then pool this money and invest in startups. So basically, these venture capitalists and private equity funds are pooling investment vehicles where the money is pooled from several partners, and the life cycle of a fund generally is 7 to 10 years, and this is the time period within which they look to seek an exit. So how does it, what is the deal flow, and how does the deal flow work? So first of all, there is a term sheet between a VC or a private equity firm This term sheet will have the preliminary terms on which a VC is going to, an investor is going to invest in the startup. So, and the term sheet is signed by the promoter of the startup itself, and the investor. So, and this is more in most cases, in the majority of cases, this is a non-binding term sheet. And what happens is when the term after the term sheet is signed, you see that there is a diligence. So there is a financial, tax, and legal diligence. And if you have interned or if you have acted on any of these deals, you would know that, you know, on a legal diligence, we figure out what is the level of compliance of the startup. So, and if there are any major non-compliances by the startup. Then the VC firm or the investor would basically validate the business model. It will evaluate and give its valuation, and it identifies the risk with the help of lawyers, financial team, forensic team, and would basically ask you to address those issues before the funding is done. And then you get on to the final documentation. The most primary or the most important documents in a funding is basically your shareholders agreement and the share subscription agreement. So share subscription agreement is through which the investor subscribes to the shares of your company, and uh, and shareholders agreement is basically to determine the rights and obligations of each party. What is the flexibility that founder would have in running the company, and what all rights are there on which founder cannot act before taking consent from the VC fund. And also, it's not just about these rights and obligations. A lot of, in fact, most of the VC firms, they work a lot with private equity, with the founders to scale up the business model. They appoint mentors, because a lot of most majority of the startups are founded by very young entrepreneurs, and they know their stuff, but they still need guidance on crucial business matters, geographies in which they should operate, the business models they should adopt. So, apart from the funding, the VC firms also provide a great level of, interaction, mentorship to the founders. And then the last stage is basically condition subsequent. Once the closing is done, the money hits the bank account, then of the startup, then the other conditions kick in, which are basically conditions that have to be completed after closing, and also the shareholders agreement gets live. So there is a question which basically asks, what is the difference between a shareholders agreement and a share subscription agreement? So the difference is very fundamental. Share subscription agreement is when you subscribe to the shares of the startup and the terms on which you will subscribe. So a share subscription agreement will have the warranties that you're going to take from the companies, that the business is run in accordance with applicable laws. All contracts are, none of the contracts which the company has shown it owns are not terminated. Business warranties in relation to the fundamental nature of the shares itself, that the shares that will be issued to the VC firm will be in accordance with the Companies Act and FEMA regulations. So this basically takes care of the instrument that is going to be issued to the VC. However, shareholders agreement is entirely different, and the relevance of the shareholders agreement is in relation to how the startup is going to function going forward. What is the rights and role of the investor, and what are the flexibilities and the rights of the promoters going forward. So like we were discussing the Flipkart story, So I thought it appropriate to, pick a timeline chart. So Flipkart was founded at around 2007, 2008. Axel was one of the first investors in 2009, and followed by Tiger Global. All these several investors, they kept on putting in money in further rounds, and firms like Axel and Tiger Global, they also tried to keep their stake by participating in the further funding rounds. So we had just discussed that, if you feel that the company has great growth prospects, so you would you will use your right of preemption, which is basically, the right to invest in further equity funding rounds, and you basically uh, end up investing and maintaining your stake that you have. And then it was followed by several investors, for example, Morgan Stanley, Naspers, and in uh, in, uh, in 2017, Tencent, eBay, and Microsoft, and ultimately in 2018, Walmart acquired it. The valuation of Flipkart in 2018, when Walmart acquired it, was 21 billion USD, and Walmart bought about 75% stake, which was valued at 16 billion. So that was one of the biggest transactions, FDI transactions, India ever had. And so you must be wondering, what does the founders get in the end, right? Because both the founders exited the company. Sachin Bansal exited earlier, followed by Binny Bansal. But what do the founders get? So the answer to that is, for example, Sachin Bansal, he must have started this company at uh, on his own bootstrap, and at the time of exit, around 10-12 years later, he took home 6,000 crore rupees, and that is almost the size of a private equity fund that you would have. So he himself is now close to a private equity fund. Of course, a lot of effort, leadership, and thinking strategy goes into it. So this is what we discussed: share subscription agreement, shareholders agreement, uh, and sometimes it is called investment agreement as well. So it is one the same thing. In certain transactions, there is an escrow arrangement also, but just to distribute the money. And there are employment agreements as well entered into entered into between the founder and the startup. So what happens is, generally when the startups commence their operations, they have a one-pager agreement or no agreement at all with the founders. But when serious VC or PE money comes in, the company and the founder are asked to enter into a more robust employment agreement to protect for any fraud by the founders, to protect any siphoning off of money, things related to related party transactions, so that the founders do not, take out money and enrich the relatives of the founders, and other business restrictions. But then again, a lot of business flexibility, so that the founders can operate the company in the way they would like to. So let us just stop here once and see if there are any questions that we have.
Right. If there are any questions, just put them in the chat box, please. Meanwhile, I think there's one question which asks about whether there are any circumstances where the investor could withdraw their funds despite and post due diligence and agreements.
Right. And So Anushka, basically, you know, what happens is that till the time due diligence and agreements are, so, the money comes in later. So if you are a VC, a private equity fund, what you will do is you will first do the due diligence, see that the company is fine. You do a financial and tax and legal diligence. These are the three primary diligences that you do. And once you are certain that the company is okay, only then you start negotiating the agreements with the founders. So you then basically negotiate the share subscription agreement and the shareholders agreement. And once these two agreements are finalized, only then you put in money on the closing date, and on the same date the shares are issued to you and the SHA goes live. So before that, there is no money that you're going to put into the company, and therefore there is no question of withdrawal of the funds. You can, of course, after the diligence stage, uh, decide that I don't want to invest in this startup, and therefore you can basically uh, kill the deal. But once the money goes into the company's account and the share and the closing occurs, after that everything is then governed by the shareholders agreement, and then you will be given an exit as a VC uh, or a PE fund at an appropriate time, or whatever is the agreed date range, maybe 5 years, 7 years, in accordance with the SHA. So now moving on. Moving on. I'll keep reading the questions and responding to them. Moving on, what are the types of instruments that are issued? So one is the equity shares, then CCPS and CCDs. CCPS are basically nothing but a form of equity capital, although it is basically preference. It is fundamentally preference share capital, but CCPS are ultimately converted into equity shares. But it provides a lot of flexibility in terms of conversion ratios, and CCPS, therefore compulsorily convertible preference shares, are the most popular mode of investment. CCDs are in the form of debentures, which requires sometimes formation of a debenture trust and a debenture fund, uh, and they also have a coupon. So the CCDs are also very popular, but CCPS are the most popular instrument that is issued in startup and VC funding. So there is a question on what is an angel network. Angel network is basically, as I said, it is nothing but institutionalization of angels. So there are several high net worth individuals who would like to invest in the startup space. And so there are organizations who have basically brought these angels together at one platform, and these angel networks then hold their own conferences or pitch meetings with startups. They also incubate startups, and whichever startups they feel are right for investment, they tip off the or provide information to their angels which are there in the network, and say that you can look at investing into these startups. Also, there are several theme based startups, angels and angel networks, and also similarly there are funds which are thematic. Some invest only in social sector, some would like to invest in health insurance sector, consumer space, e-commerce. So the angel networks also, they have segregations within themselves, and they basically do thematic investments as well. So there is a question on if you can please discuss the impact of COVID-19 on PE and VC investments. Yeah, so I will briefly touch upon it and inform you on what is happening at uh, in respect of those investments which were already made. How are the startups dealing with this? And then there is a question on from Yashasvi. Will we witness any shift in recent trends in private equity in light of the government's decision to boycott Chinese apps? So, Yashasvi, the more important issue actually is that the government has banned investments from China in the sense that they are under the automatic route. So first, uh, you know, so there was a news item which reported that the People's Bank of China has increased its stake in the HDFC Bank. Now, because of the global turmoil in the share markets globally, there were several opportunistic investments being made, and Chinese companies, which are most of the times backed by the government, they were investing in several companies across Europe, US, Australia, and also India. And to basically not let these opportunistic investors buy shares at cheap prices, the government said that all investments from border areas which have a land border with India, including China, will not be allowed. So, apart from China, there is no significant investing entity which is based out of any other of our neighbors except China. So Chinese investments now would require government approval, and therefore there is a lot of issues there, and therefore the companies are trying to because in almost every VC or private equity fund as well, in several VC or private equity funds, there is Chinese money. So if these private funds themselves cannot invest in India, that becomes an issue. People are finding ways out, and there are certain questions which are posed by the investors, law firms, to the government, and we may soon get some headway into that, or in the form of a response or a clarification from the government. So these are the, so someone has asked what is the difference between subscription agreement and shareholders agreement. So these are the key terms of a shareholders agreement. Now, what you need to, so we have, so one is corporate governance. Corporate governance basically relates to how the board will be constituted, how the meetings will take place. So, so basically, if you are a founder, you would like to appoint the majority board. You will give, for example, one board seat to every serious institutional investor. There will be, so whenever there is a further issue of capital, which is second bullet, they will, the PE investors will have the right of preemption. Then there are transfer restrictions on the shares of the founder. That founder cannot sell its shares to anyone without prior permission from the VC fund or the investor. Then there is liquidation preference, which is one of the most important. And someone had asked question in relation to broad-based, narrow-based ratchets. So let's see that as well. Then there is the most important point is exit, and that is exactly what we have seen when Walmart gave an exit by buying shares of several private equity and VC funds in Flipkart and provided them an exit. So basically, founders of Flipkart provided an exit to their investors by getting Walmart on board, which was a strategic investor. And there are then terms like when an employment agreement can be terminated if there are grave situations where the founder has not been able to live up to the expectations, or in the sense he has not been he has not followed the best corporate governance principle. There is fraud, things like that. And there is a question from Vatsal on how does SPAs, share purchase agreements, come into play? Do SPA hold any relevance to private equity deals? So basically, see, SPAs is basically a secondary transaction. So SPA would come into play only when there is an exit given to PVC funds. SPAs can also come into play. So, for example, Walmart entered into an SPA with uh, all the existing investors, majority of the existing investors, including SoftBank, etc., to give them an exit. And Walmart bought secondary shares from these investors of Flipkart. So that is when the SPA comes. But at the time of investing into the company, it is a share subscription agreement that is the document which governs. Similarly, and also a PE investor can do a mix of uh, acquisition through secondary sale, which is through an SPA. So let us say if investor one invests in the company in 2015, and there is a new investor in a new series round, which we are having right now in 2020. So the investor two comes in, and investor two would offer the investor one that I can also buy your shares out and also invest some money into the company. So if the investor two is investing, for example, 100 crore rupees, he would basically invest 75 crores into the company by subscribing to the equity shares or CCPS, and would, depending on the valuation, would pay 25 crores for buying the shares of investor one through a secondary deal. So this is where the SPAs come into picture. So this is a slide on quorum rights or corporate governance matters, basically voting rights, affirmative vote matters, and information rights. So we will discuss these briefly going forward. Now I have a question to all of you, and you can type your responses in the chat box. I would like everyone to participate in that. So if you're a founder, would you let your investors appoint majority of directors on the board of your company? So let's say you have already done Series D round. There are 5 investors sitting in the company, and you are a founder. So what would you do? 5 of them want at least one director on the board. So they have appointed 5 directors on the board, and you are a founder. So whether would you give them the right to appoint a majority of the board or not? So I would request everyone to type their responses. What do you think? Yeah, interesting responses. Anyone else? What do you think? Would you appoint? Would you give the right to appoint board of directors, majority board? So great responses, guys. It gives me a message also that all of you are awake and listening. So and some really great responses, along with the reasoning that it will compromise the vision of the founders. The founders will lose functional and operational control. It will take away the autonomy. So that's great. Yeah. So the founders would always try to keep the majority of the board with them, and they would like to appoint the majority board. However, in reality, what happens is that, let us say there are 5 investors and there are 2 founders. So these 2 founders are on the These two founders are on the board of the company. Then there are 5 directors, or each of every investor, and the founder would write in the SHA that I have the right to always appoint the majority board. But in reality, in most cases, they do not exercise this right because we don't want a board of 11 people. It is a logistical nightmare also for a startup. So what they do is they retain the right, not appoint it right now, not appointed right now, and they'll retain the right. And if there is a situation where some of the investors are not getting along on a particular matter, then the founder will exercise this right, appoint a majority board, make that decision, and carry on with the decision making. Now, so these are the affirmative vote matters, also called veto rights, also called reserved matters. And these, as an investor, the PE funds, VC funds would generally negotiate on. And what it means is that all decisions can be made by the founder except the following, which means that if you change the business of the company altogether, if you include a new business, if you buy a subsidiary, I need to take a look because I need to know whom you're buying it from, whether the subsidiary is clean, what are the medium to long term benefits to the startup on acquiring a subsidiary. So for example, you would remember that when these radio taxi companies, they were a lot before. So there was Taxi for Sure, there were a couple of more in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, and all of these got consolidated. How these got consolidated? These got consolidated because the investors they were putting in money in basically primarily 2 companies, Ola and Uber. And therefore these companies, Ola and Uber, they acquired companies like, for example, Ola acquired Taxi for Sure. And in fact, in several cases, what happens is that the investors are common. So Ola and Taxi for Sure had common investors, and they said that you should merge. And therefore, so that it would bring in capital efficiency and a market outreach, it will be a bigger enterprise. So the investors, the VC funds also facilitate these kinds of investments for their own gains, as well as sometimes for the gains of the founders and the company as a whole. Similarly, there were a lot of food delivery companies. If you would recall, there was Food Panda. Then so now everything got consolidated. There were Uber Eats, Zomato bought Uber Eats in a share swap deal. It was a cashless deal. And I think Swiggy, so someone bought Food Panda as well. So basically all of these got consolidated. So as I explained to you earlier, that there may be several startups in the food delivery space, and then out of that only 1% survived, and within that also it got consolidated. So for example, so this is an affirmative vote matter where if Ola wanted to buy Taxi for Sure, it would have to go to the investors, seek their approval, and only then make that acquisition. So here is creation of subsidiaries, JVs, there is merger, acquisitions, spin-offs, sales of any material assets of the company. There is a change in the business plan or the annual budget. So these are all also negotiable. It is not necessary that all of these are veto matters. So it is your role as a counsel. If you are representing a fund, you would want to have as many as possible, but you have to take care that operational flexibility is provided to the founder so that he can run the company and the way he wants with his vision. And if you're representing a founder, then you'll have to make sure that the veto rights that they are given, that you are giving today, should not come back to bite you later. So now here is a question that I have. If you are a founder, would you give your investors a veto on day-to-day operation and management of the company? So let us say a PE investor comes and tells you that I would like to have control over some of the operational matters. For example, I will not let you hire any employees without my consent, or you cannot have business contracts without my consent. Uh, so if you are a founder and a private equity investor or investor is asking veto or affirmative vote matters or a veto right on an operational item, would you give that? Please write your thoughts in the chat box. Great answers. Yeah. So yeah, basically, great answers, guys. You basically have the hang of what private equity investments are and what is the role of the founder. So which is great to know, because uh, because we need to see the bigger picture, and it is very good to see that you know the bigger picture. And some of the comments are also that because it is founders vision, and and that is why the investors are investing in the company. They are piggybacking on the founder to give them that multitude of returns that they want, and they will get a high reward for the high risk the private equity funds are taking. And basically, operational rights, yes, should be with the founders, operation and management rights, because basically, essentially, at the end of the day, it is the founder who has basically predicted what the society is going to need in the next 5 years. And he has predicted that in the next 5 years, this is going to be the big thing. So for example, in 2006, 7, Steve Jobs figured out that uh, smartphones are the future. And at that time, nobody thought that, there could be such a thing like smartphones. And then they came up with your iPhone. And, and since a company like Nokia, which never bothered and thought that I will continue to remain as dominant as I am today, uh, and it met a entirely different fate which Apple is experiencing today. Everyone followed Apple, and Nokia was sold over uh, to another company. So similarly, same happened with the camera, the point and shoot camera companies. So because they did not come up with new structures, with new models, smart cameras, and they used to make those reels. They also they are also out of the picture now. They are also bankrupt. So that is why, because the private equity funds, they have invested on the vision of the founder who has predicted what the society is going to need. And therefore he needs that investment flexibility so that they can undertake the business. The most recent example I would like to give you is the following, where this is a startup which basically got funding even before it started operations, which is a very rare case. because it was from a very renowned founder, Mukesh Bansal and Ankit Naguri, who run the Cure Fit and Cult Fit brands. And so Mukesh Bansal had founded Myntra. He worked in Flipkart for a small while, and then he founded this company. And because of COVID, the model had to be completely changed, because all their uh, very expensive real estate centers, all of them were shut since March, and they had no revenue at all. And they have completely in just within April, they completely transformed it. And because they had operational, I'm assuming, but because they had operational rights to take all those decisions, they were able to transform the company into a e-commerce venture altogether, where all services are offered now online, and a lot of expansion into new business items. Yeah. So moving forward, now we would try to wrap up in the next 10 minutes. So moving forward, so I've basically, written down these points, and let's say we will briefly touch upon these points. Uh, there are transfer restrictions that we discussed on the promoter. The promoter cannot sell shares. There is only a small liquidity given to the promoters. If they want to sell shares, they can, just so that they have some money if they want to spend some money. So there is a small percentage which is agreed. Then I would like to touch upon the tag along right, or the drag along right concepts primarily. Basically, tag along right is that if the founder is exiting the company, or if the founder is selling the company, then the investors would have the right to tag their shares along with the founder. So let us say if the founder is selling the shares in a way that founder's stake in the company or the board seat in the company goes below a certain level, then the investors would like to have a complete exit, because that is no more a founder run management, and therefore they would like to seek an exit. That is a tag along right. Similarly, a drag along right works where the investors say that if you are not able to provide us an exit in the next 7 years, let us say 3x exit. So if I am investing 100 crores today in the company, you need to give me a return of at least 300 crores. And if you fail to do that, then I have the right to arrange a strategic sale of the company. I will find a buyer. And when I find a buyer, I will drag you along, because let us say if the buyer comes in and he wants that I want 100% of the company, I don't want any other small shareholders or small or large remaining in the company. I want full control, full shares. So the founder will facilitate that sale, and the investor, as an investor, I should be able to drag you out of the company. So this is how primarily tag and drag work. So here is a question for you guys, and it's a very important aspect actually. If you are a founder, you would restrict the PE investor to sell shares of your company to do you allow him to sell shares to any third party, or to a competitor of the company? What would your response be? So assume that you are a founder, and the PE investor is asking that I would like to sell the shares to everyone, uh, and what would your negotiation strategy be? Yeah, great answers, guys. I would request everyone to participate. Okay, the wave is, someone has changed the wave from A to B. So a lot of answers in favor of B, some answers in favor of A. Amrit says A and B both should be kept open. That's also a fair point. Right. So basically, guys, so the way I had formulated the question was that, you know, there is no right answer to this. Obviously, if you are representing the founder, you would try to ask the investor that you will not sell to any third party. But the question is whether you get that right or not, or whether that is a standard ask or not. So that is not a standard ask. Actually, what investors do is investors say that I have the right. Promoter has a lock-in, so promoter cannot sell to anyone without offering a right of first refusal to us. But when we sell, we should be able to sell to any third party. And again, then there are rights attached when I am selling to any third party. But at the same time, as a founder, I would prominently argue that you can sell to any third party, but you will not sell to a company competitor who is in the same space of business, who is operating in the same business area. And why is that? That is because once a company competitor is on your cap table, there are chances that there are, like in majority of the cases, it would be assumed that the value of the company would go down because there is a company competitor sitting on the cap table, which means that he will have all information rights, because there is information that is shared with the eligible investors above a certain threshold, 5%. So all management accounts, quarterly accounts, MIS, of course the audited accounts, everything is shared with investors who hold about, depending on what you negotiate, but mostly about 5%. So whoever owns above 5%, you give information rights, and once the competitor has information on you, they will be able to defeat you, or they will try and use that information for their own advantage. So therefore, while you can ask for it, you are unlikely to get A, but definitely you should argue, and you should make sure that the investors do not sell shares to any company competitor. So now I would like to briefly touch upon what are the exit mechanisms. So for example, we briefly discussed, so Flipkart example, where the Walmart was a strategic sale, which is bullet point 2 over here, that there is IPO or a qualified IPO. So the classic example is Uber, where the company went for an IPO. It was a great IPO, and the IPO that failed recently in the US is of WeWork. The company wanted to give, or the investors wanted to get an exit, and therefore they took the company to the IPO, but it did not get the desired price. And if the startup fails, or they're not able to get an exit, so Micromax had to do a company buyback, which is the third bullet point. Or it can happen in a solvency scenario as well, where the company is doing well. If the investor wants an exit, the company can say that, okay, I'll buy back shares, or the company can arrange for a sale of the shares of the investor to another investor who is interested in investing in the company. And then in the end, if the investor has not still been able to provide any exit, then the investors may seek to enforce a drag along right, where the investors go out, find a buyer, and once they find a buyer, they will drag the promoters out of the company. So guys, that's a wrap on this session. The objective was to basically take you through the key concepts, so that you have the bigger picture. There are, of course, a lot of intricacies what are the price protection, what is full ratchet, broad based, narrow based. So these are a little complicated concepts, and I wanted to first give you the bigger picture and, in simple terms, what exactly is a private equity deal, what is its life cycle, uh, and similar things. So we discussed the life cycle. You now understand, I believe, that uh, how the startup funding works, what are the various stages, what are the agreements that are entered into, uh, and what is the end game in this, which is the exit through an IPO, through a strategic sale. Yeah, so Vatsal has asked a question, although highly improbable, can we foresee geo platforms going public anytime soon or in remote future? So see, I have also read reports which state that geo platforms would be going public, and there is a very important recent amendment to the listing regulations. This amendment has been done by SEBI. It has allowed Indian startups to list directly on US stock exchanges. So emerging market companies, they list in US stock markets, because US is the mother market first of all for stocks. And why is it called the mother market? Because it gives you a better price discovery and a better valuation of your startup. So for example, if you list in India only, there are several restrictions in foreign investments, and there are several other factors which may lead to you to not get the exact price of the startup, of your venture. But in the US, because it is a global market, there are very less restrictions. It is a preferred uh, market for listing companies, and a lot of Chinese companies and other companies from emerging markets, they directly list on the US, primarily on Nasdaq, because it's a tech index, and mostly software companies and tech companies list there. Dow Jones is an industrial exchange, so an S&P 500 again is a combination of companies. So S&P 500 is an index. There are three primary: Dow Jones, S&P 500, and Nasdaq. Most of the tech companies prefer listing at Nasdaq. So yeah, there is a probability a lot of Indian startups would look to directly list without listing on at BSE, NSE in India. They would like to directly list there. Yeah, so there is a very interesting question from Samarth, who asks, when should a lawyer negotiate a full tag along right versus a pro rata tag? So what happens is, so as an investors council, what you would do is that if the founder is selling shares, he has to first take consent from the investors. If the investors agree, they would allow him to him or her to basically sell the shares to a third party. And along with that, they would ask a tag along right. So there are two kinds of tag along rights. One is a full tag along right. So I as an investor own, there are four investors holding 10% each, and there is a founder. There are two founders holding 60%. So if I would say that if you are selling to any third party, which I permit, I will have a full tag along, which means you take all of my 40%. So even if you're selling, let's say only 5%, but I have the right to fully exit the company because you are selling. But as a founders council, what you have to argue is that if the if I am selling a large chunk of my shareholding, which takes me below, for example, a certain threshold, it could be 51, it could be 26% also in companies which have several investors. So if I go below 26% and also I lose the management of the board, I lose because of this sale. If I lose the right to appoint majority directors of the board, then in that event only I will give you a full tag along. Otherwise, it will be a pro rata tag. Now, what is a pro rata tag? Pro rata tag is if I am selling 5% shares, then each founder only in that proportion of my shareholding in the company can sell their shares, which is equivalent to their proportion of their shareholding in the total share capital of the company. So that would mean that along with 5%, I am basically allowing investors in aggregate, the 40% investors in an aggregate to sell just about 4% of the equity shares of the company along with me. In a full tag, I will end up having all 40%. I will be facilitating sale of all of the 40% of the shares of the founders, of the investors along with my. So even when I am only selling 5%, I am facilitating a sale for another 40%, which makes it 45%. So this is the difference between tag, full tag and pro rata, 45% versus 9%.
Right. Any more questions?
So yeah, Shruti has asked a question on whether it would be preferable to incorporate earnout provisions in PEVC agreements. So see, Shruti, generally earnouts are in M&A transactions where there is a sale of a company, and earnout is basically a milestone. So if I am acquiring the company, let's say I acquire the 100% of the company today or 51% of the company today, I will tell the sellers that I will give you 51% of value today, or some value today, but depending on the milestones that the company is going to achieve in the next 3 years, I will give you more. So that is where the earnouts come into play. In PEVC funding, because the nature of funding is entirely different, there is no coupon which is basically given. So basically, earnout is in a PE scenario would mean that you are basically getting some fixed return every year, but that's not the case. You don't get that return every year. You get a return only when you exit or you sell your shares in a secondary sale. You can do a partial exit, you can do a full exit whenever there is the next round or whenever the promoter or the founder offers you an exit. So
Right.
yeah, so that's all from my side. Thank you so much, guys. Great questions. Some of them I've not been able to answer because of the paucity of time, but I think you now have the larger picture of how the PVC deals work. And it was great interacting with you guys. And thank you very much, RGNUL and the RBS book series for inviting me. I had a great time, and it was great interacting with all of you in the last couple of days to set up this whole thing. And you have set this up in a very small, a very short time. So you set this up by organizing Zoom and everything in time. So thank you so much for that.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. With this, we come to an end of the session. I hope everyone had something to take away from this, and I'm sure like I have a lot to learn. I have had a lot to learn from this session. We'd like to thank our speaker, Mr. Abhishek Dubey, for being so generous with his knowledge and sparing his time. I know time is hard to come by these days, and yeah, we're really thankful to join us. And we'd like to thank our audience for participating in this talk and making it a success. We have future webinars scheduled as well. And so we kindly request everyone to fill up the Google form and provide personal details so that we can contact you regarding the same in the future. And please also feel free to go through our LinkedIn page. We've just set it up, and follow it and spread the word. All right. And at the end of it all, we'd like to thank the team at RBS for putting in their hard work and making it a success once again. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Bye.